looking forward to catching up with you and getting your views about what's going on down in Australia. So I'll get into that a little bit further on in the conversation. But up front, I've already obviously said I'm a great fan of your work and I've learned so much from your interviews, but most particularly because of the way you extract information with good questioning and ask the questions I think that are in most people's minds, as opposed to just trying to make yourself seem clever. Which I think is a great skill as a journalist, is actually to go with it with a complete sense of fact finding as opposed to self-celebration, and it's definitely very obvious in your work. I want to really, just for everybody's sake, get a little bit of understanding of your background and really how you came to be on this journey doing what you're doing.
Well, the initial comments that you made, not trying to just come across as clever, I mean, I think that would be very, very silly, personally, and I would fail. Because I think my first priority, probably my only priority really, is to learn more myself. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's not as altruistic as it sounds half the time. I have been a seeker forever, and I've been down this road of researching, conspiracies and religion and the New Age movement and all of these things for 25 years. And I've just always wanted to know more. My driving force is wanting to know the truth. And I think I've always wanted to know where we really came from and what our true history is. I think that's been the biggest question for me, because nothing has made sense. From the religious version of who we are and what our history is to what we were taught in school about history, it's never made sense to me. And I think that's why people say you always ask the questions that, I had or I have, because I'm like everybody else. I'm just another person out there who wants to know the truth. And where I differ is I'm just making the answers that I get public. That's where the altruism came in, I guess, is that if I was going to be of service, that was one way I could do it, was to allow people sharing what I was learning and let them have the benefit of hearing from people that I was just lucky enough to get in touch with, I think. I think it's also clearly what I'm meant to be doing, because it came so easy in so many respects. Nothing I've done has been this easy in terms of it just flowed and doors opened and people were available to me that technically shouldn't have been.
Yeah. Well, you find, and funny enough, I actually have just had an interview. I spoke to Franco Collins for the first time this week. And
how did that go?
Oh, it was wonderful. Do you know what? I just love him so much. He's such a, and it's an Australian thing. I'm going to push the Australian cause here. Let me tell you, I watched MasterChef, and funny enough, I did MasterChef, I think it was in 2002, 2003 in the UK. I actually got onto MasterChef and got through a few rounds. And I really appreciate the Australian MasterChef. And for one reason, and that is because Australians have such great personalities. And all of them, without exception, I've yet to find an Australian who just, the warmth that comes from you guys. And I just say, I believe that people from sunnier countries have sunnier dispositions. And that's what I can say about Frank, is it's nice to have this information delivered from someone who's got warmth and genuine, humility, and wonderful guy, honestly, and so much, I think, positive direction without wanting to be a messiah. And funny enough, I did pass on your comments. I said how you had commented that he's absolutely qualified, if ever, to be a messiah. He had such a laugh. Really interesting person, and funny enough, one of the few people that you and I have interviewed in common, and I made the comments to him that it's interesting how similar the journeys are of people like you, like him, myself, Santos, and various other people that I've interviewed. Even when I listened to your interview with El Farrar, parts of what he was saying, it's like, man, I went through that, I was experiencing that, that's exactly what happened to me, but so much in detail that you realize that it's not a coincidence that we are doing this. I think, I really do believe, you know, before we came into our bodies, people like you and like me had an agreement to be doing this.
It's the only explanation for it, really. You know, like I said, for something to flow the way it does, and for you to not be feeling like you're swimming against a stream, which has been how I felt most of my life in regards to other activities that I've done. This one just flows. Okay,
well let's talk about your sort of background, Lisa. I mean, all we really know about you is that you're a mother of 3 with gorgeous children, and very bravely raising them whilst coming to know all this information. How, you know, talk about a bit about the sort of jobs that you've done, and you know, how you sort of educate your children in preparing them for the world out there should they want to take up jobs or, you know, somehow create a future for themselves.
I didn't have a career. I didn't have a profession. I was very much a kid of the 80s in some respects. I don't know what it was like in other parts of the world, but being in high school in the 80s here, you were living with, you know, the Reagan era. Mm-hmm. That whole idea that, you know, he was going to roll over one morning and just push the wrong button and it was all going to be over. And there was this sense of uncertainty about our futures. And a lot of us, you know, left school at the end of year 10 at 16, went into trades or just got a job. There wasn't a lot of long-term thinking. And I think also, I mean, the result of that now is that my generation are the lowest in home ownership as well. You know, that whole kind of short-term thinking. And so I floated. For me, it was about taking whatever job was at hand to have money to do the things I wanted to do. It wasn't until, I guess, motherhood, really, that I started to feel like I needed some direction and I needed a purpose. But as far as my kids are concerned, they've been brought up with meditation. You know, we used to meditate when they were little, really little, 2 and 3. And I'd sing them, you know, the Gayatri mantra to put them to sleep. Always talk to them about being able to heal themselves. I can actually give you an amazing incident in regards to that. My daughter was having asthma attacks, and I got hold of some amla, which is Indian gooseberry, one of the highest forms of vitamin C on the planet, and incredibly powerful for the lungs. And could just give her two of these capsules, and it would bring her out of an asthma attack within about 10 minutes. So we were driving one day through the country, miles from anywhere, and she started to wheeze. And this is amazing for me. She was probably about 9 at the time, and I just talked her through it. She sat in the back seat. I talked her through it, and she pretended, she visualised that she was taking these 2 amla tablets and just kept repeating the word. And it only took 3 or 4 minutes and she went to sleep. And she woke up 20 minutes later completely fine. She knew from experience that it worked, that the amla worked, and she knew from experience that meditation worked. The 2 combined stopped an asthma attack in its tracks. So they've always had that, you know, growing up.
Yeah.
They've always had me talking to them about my version of reality, I guess. And now they're actually, they kind of walk between 2 worlds now, I've noticed. You know, because they're in the mainstream school system now. In high school, they go to a performing arts school. They're both very creative and artistic. One's a singer, one's a dancer, you know, a photographer, artist. You know, they're pretty creative, and that's the part that I encourage. Their aspirations are to be artists in some form, and they know that what they're being taught in school may not necessarily be the truth, but they also know that in order to get through school, that they just play the game.
Sure. I wish I had that kind of awareness when I was growing up as a child, and to a certain degree, I think I always did. I distinctly had memories of myself at lunch breaks sitting around going, what is this really all about? This thing we call school. I remember having those sort of momentary sort of flashes of, I don't know what they were, genius or whatever, but I think to actually have that cognitive knowledge, which is given to you by your parents, and not have your parents pushing you for high grades, I think the way mine were, it's fantastic. And also to have a mother who is educated to the point where they don't really need to go to school, Lisa. You could probably teach them everything they need to know.
Well, we did start off homeschooling them, and for the first, I think, 3 years, that they just got to a point where, as kids, socially, they needed their worlds to open up. And you could see that they were craving it. They were craving more kid interaction, and that's really why they go to school. Yeah. If you ask them why do you go, it's because they want to hang out with friends. It's got nothing to do with school itself.
And in terms of where you are now, you've interviewed how many different people?
I don't know, I don't count.
But, quite a substantial number of people watching your interviews, learning from the information that you're learning from. And, let's talk a bit about what your perspective is. And I mean, this is gold. This is absolute gold to anybody listening. And I've said to you before, at the point that I interviewed Bill Ryan, he was probably one of the most aspirational people I had met up until that time. In terms of one of the interviews he gave me turned out to be the core around which we built our film The Message, just simply because it covered so many of the vast questions that connect so many dots in between all the information you get from all the various whistleblowers and people putting out information. And I think what people forget to realize is, yes, there's all these wonderful people, all this wonderful research, but mustn't forget the importance of the people in between, the people communicating this information, such as yourself, who gather such perspective, having to look at everything in detail. You do get to absorb it in detail when you do the editing of the information, putting it onto YouTube, etc. Now, your very, very valuable perspective on sort of what is going on in the world, what you've learned, and where you currently sit with what you, for example, would tell your children.
Well, the world is deconstructing, and this goes into what you said earlier too about what's happening in Australia. How can I put this? I mean, I guess all of this is stating the obvious really to a degree, but everything that's built on lies and fraud is crumbling, deconstructing. And it seems that this awakening, this revolution is global, but what I'm seeing is every country is playing their own particular role in this. For example, you've got Canada, through Kevin Annett, taking on the Crown and the Vatican head on.
Yeah.
You've got, say, Iceland taking on the banks head on. You've got Michael Tellinger in South Africa taking on the banks head on, but he's doing it in a different way. He's doing it in a way that exposes the corrupt relationship between the governments and the banks.
Yeah.
You've got, hopefully in the US, fingers crossed, you've got the military's role in actually rounding these guys up. And what I'm finding is coming out of Australia, because you probably have this too, you get so many people contacting you and you have, lots of great conversations, but they don't turn into interviews for various reasons.
Yes.
These people may not want to go public for a whole bunch of reasons. Perhaps they've already been harassed by the authorities, or they just don't want to be ridiculed or whatever. And the information that's coming out of Australia is concepts, ideas, and even models for what a new paradigm could look like, and the tools to get there, which I think that's because we're not doing on a large scale any of those other things. I mean, there's small movements around the country trying to expose the corruption of the courts, for example, or mortgage fraud, but nothing that's sort of broken through and become a global phenomenon like Tellinger's case has, for example. But that's what's coming to me out of this country. And that's exciting, you know. I've got one guy who hopefully will go public eventually, but he was nearly put in prison for doing this, was teaching people and showing and working with people and putting them through a healing process that actually switches on the other 90% of their brain. And he was nearly put in prison for it. We've got several people here with working models for how communities can actually run completely self-sufficiently and for up to 2 million people. We've got, the technology side of things is coming out from all over the world, as you know, but it just seems like right now each country has picked one part of this illusion to deconstruct. Are you seeing that?
Yes, I am seeing that. First off, did you get to speak to Kevin Annett, by the way? Talking about Michael Tellinger, have you had a chance to speak to him yet?
No, I haven't, no.
Michael's pretty difficult to get hold of. He actually set us up for a few radio shows when he was meant to join us, and we did eventually get him on, and I did catch up with him in South Africa when I was out there. But unfortunately his case, now they've totally repudiated it. They've basically just turned around and said something as simple as, we don't like the way you stay up with the documents, and to be honest with you, can't be bothered to file the suit. And they've just not even taken it any further. They've laughed in his face. But what you've got to understand is that's the South African government. It is so utterly corrupt. I've got friends who are studying law telling me that they change the laws every single day. They can't even tell you what they're going to be examined on by the time that it gets to examinations.
That's extraordinary.
Yes, it is. And this is it, is that, of course, Tellinger's now, yes, he got this out in the open, well done. Everybody now knows, like in South Africa, well, not mainstream media didn't feature Michael Tellinger at all, but those people who kind of know who he is, follow his work, particularly his crowd who follow his Slave Species of God work, which is pretty intense, they now know who he is, what he's trying to do, and yes, that we live in a corrupt system. The only problem with Michael Tellinger, unfortunately, is he hasn't researched far enough, doesn't understand the Vatican's role of things, and still stands and sings people like Nelson Mandela's praises, who Nelson Mandela is clearly a Knight of Malta, Knight of St. John. So, there's that. There's the one, I just wonder as to my country, knowing what I know about how dire it is in third world countries, and I listen to my mom, and I just wonder as to, are we really going to have that uprising within South Africa? And I hope we are. This is the reason I do what we do, is to have that sort of voice for South Africa, outside of South Africa, sort of trying to raise people's awareness on the outside. But it's not always. Unfortunately, the ignorance within the country, and it's not necessarily their fault, but it's because they've been stupefied by poverty. And we don't really see that in any of the other countries like Canada. I don't know if you really have that kind of poverty in Australia. I've not been... We don't
have that poverty, but we do have apathy. Yeah.
Well, it's the apathy that leads to the poverty, I'm afraid. We have the biggest rich poor divide in South Africa. I can't, the average person can afford to have a full-time cleaner, with a good job. A secretary can afford to pay a full-time cleaner to come in and clean the house. In London, if you want to afford something like that, you have to be earning on the upper end of the scale. Thing is, because of the labour, so much labour, so much unemployment, it pushes the prices for labour in South Africa low. And this is how we recently had, Obama's wife, Michelle Obama, out in South Africa, talking about South Africa as their business partner. Oh, you mean their slave trade partner, where you can get everything made nice and cheaply, because everyone there gets paid a pittance, and the cost of living has now exceeded Europe with the inflation rates. So in one way, Lisa, I hope there is this deconstruction going on, because I just don't know how much longer, for example, people in my country can take it, because this is where we have the most people in the world dying every day of hunger and starvation.
it can't. This is not sustainable. This is going to completely deconstruct one way or the other, in my opinion. We can't keep hanging on like this.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever thought about what happens if? Because that's my favourite question. What if? We get to Christmas, say the 25th of December, and it's same old, same old.
Do you know what? I have actually thought about that, because I keep thinking to myself, all right, I've got two strategies in place for my life. If we get to the 21st December and we move into another dimension, yay, yay, yay. I've got a whole strategy planned out for next year's and books that I am going to be writing, should we make it past that, and should it still matter. You know, I'm not going to worry about those things this year, because more than anything, what I want to do is finish the books that I've already started, but spend this year really working on myself. I haven't been spending a lot of time with other people. Mostly the contact that I have is through the interviews and through speaking to people who I feel can educate me, and then I can in turn educate other people through recordings. But really about focusing on working on myself. You know, I realized a long time ago when I was doing this that it's impossible and crazy to think that we can change the world, but we can change ourselves, and that is the best place to start. You know, I am the least perfect person on earth. I'm full of flaws, and I have so many demons from my past that I've worked through, but what they have done is I've learned that my darkness has brought out this diversity and uniqueness within me that I can only now thank the darkness for, because I wouldn't be the person I am today had I not gone through those challenges, had I not had to face some of those things, had I not made some of those really awful mistakes. And now's the time where I'm kind of reflecting and learning and putting into spiritual practice all those things, and kind of going, all right, I think this is what it's all about. It's about coming to the awareness, working it out. And Frank O'Connor said something very interesting. Most importantly, it's about, freeing yourself on whatever level that is, and making a stand and going, you will not put up with this, because if we don't, we absolutely deserve what's coming at us. And this is why they do it to us, because they laugh at us for putting up with it.
Yeah, we're victims of our own apathy and our own ignorance.
Yeah.
Now, whether that ignorance was encouraged and perpetrated or not, it doesn't really matter in the end.
No. But in terms of what is happening in Australia, and this is something I really want to speak to you about. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the native and sort of settler situation in South Africa. Kevin Annett has been wonderful at vocalising, putting out all the details about the genocide in Canada, what happened with the natives there. What has happened in Australia? Obviously, one of the most interesting things I found from Santos Bonacci was how he pointed out that abnormal meant that it's not normal, and therefore Aboriginal should mean that it's not original, but somehow they are the original people that are called Aboriginal, and it's clever wordplay.
Yes.
In order not to make them the original people. Now let's talk about your native situation in relation to what's going on.
Well, that's interesting, because it's only now that they're starting to talk. I mean, the original people of this country have been notoriously quiet and closed-mouthed about what's going on in the world and what's going on at this time, and they've only just started to talk in literally the last few months. And I'll tell you what I've been learning about that is that there's a guy called Stephen Strong, and he has been on our Blog Talk radio program on Oculus, he and his son. For whatever reason, the original people and lots of different mobs too around the country have accepted him as a spokesperson for them. And he's written 3 different books so far, and he's rewriting history. What he has come to believe through listening to the Dreamtime stories, through archaeological evidence, through, not carbon dating, but other forms of dating that are far more accurate. There's been 6 different types has been used on some of these archaeological finds, is that the whole out of Africa theory is incorrect. It's actually out of Australia. the Aboriginals talk about the Pleiades a lot. No matter which mob you talk to, I don't know, when I say mob, that's actually how the Originals refer to the different nations here as mobs. They all say when you tell our story, you must mention the Pleiades. That's where we're from, as far as they're concerned. And life started here, on this continent, and went out from here. And there's evidence that the Egyptians, the Spanish, going back, the Egyptians going back thousands of years, and other cultures all came back here and visited. And that it was the Originals here that taught them religion, surgery, gave them a lot of their wisdom, and which they then took back. That, in terms of what's happening now, there was I don't know, you probably heard about this, there was an earthquake in March, on March 23, in the very top of South Australia, south of Uluru, south of Alice Springs, Ayers Rock. Most people probably outside of Australia know it as. And 1 month before that earthquake, Stephen was contacted and told there would be an earthquake. They told the day that it would happen, and told it would be a 9.1, the same as hit Japan. And for 3 days prior to the earthquake, some Aboriginal elder women, some white elder women, some Native American elder women, and Canadian Inuit women, I believe. They all came over. The Americans brought their drums, and they sat on the spot of the earthquake and drummed it down for 24 hours straight in shifts for 3 days. And they drummed it down to a 5.1. Now, the interesting thing about that was there was lots of speculation because it was very shallow. So, okay, the talk online was, it's suspicious, it's too shallow for a natural earthquake, it's not in the right spot for a natural earthquake, there's no plates, couldn't be from plate movement, must be HAARP, But these women knew it was coming. And so the story that I eventually found out through Stephen was that it wasn't natural in the normal sense of the word, as in being caused by plate movement, but it wasn't artificial either. They've got a Dreamtime story about, and this, you'll laugh at this because it's so in common with everything else. They've got like a lizard king that lives under the earth, and he's returning. He's coming back, and the earthquake marked. They were waiting for it. The earthquake marked the beginning of the 9-month gestation period, which takes us to the 23rd of December, and that's when they decided it was time to talk. They were waiting for one more sign, which happened only in the last week or so. And the story is, and I'm paraphrasing the story, but it's something along the lines of when the lizard spews blood from his belly, he's had enough, and it's time to stop. Now, there's a huge mine in Alice Springs that in the last week or so, for some unknown reason, according to the experts, this red dust plume just spewed up out of the earth, covered everything, freaked everybody out. And the Original said, okay, that was it. And they're actually gathering as we speak to go and have that mine shut down, and they'll do it at whatever cost. So those are the two signs that they were waiting for to tell them it was time to speak up. They see this return as a very good thing. They've been waiting for it. They're hoping for it. And as this is what they've been waiting for. This beast represents the return to their way of life, the return to the Palladian way of life. The return of the dream time. And they know that if we don't start to listen to their stories and listen to how to live, that we won't make it. And if we don't make it, either will they, because all of their stories will die out as well. So it's for the first time now, there's a real cooperation happening. I mean, these guys were annihilated. You know, there was absolute genocide was committed on these people as well.
Yeah, I was wanted to ask you a bit about that. You know, what sort of techniques and tactics, anything similar to what went on in Canada?
Absolute massacres is what went on initially, and there were still massacres happening at the end of the 1800s. In fact, they were scalping them and selling their scalps as late as 1920s and 30s at least. There are rumours that it was happening even into the 50s and 60s. Then there was the stolen generation, where the church just came along and would kidnap the children, especially mixed blood kids, but anyone really, to assimilate and put them into these institutions. Some of them were adopted into white families, but for the most part they were just brought up in institutions run by the church. Even over the last sort of 20 years, there's been an effort to try and reconnect these families. People have met their parents, their siblings that they hadn't seen since they were babies. Kevin Rudd, when he came in, the first thing he did was apologise for the stolen generation, which was a long time coming, obviously.
Yeah.
And even now, you know, this is one of the things that I discussed with David Icke, actually, because he was talking about the plan for our financial future and how they're going to, you know, to control us financially. And I said it's already happening with the Indigenous people in this country, because if they're on any kind of government payment, essentially, you know, government support payment, in certain places, it's happening in parts of the Northern Territory, their money is put onto instead of it just going into their bank account, it now goes onto a card, and that card can only be used at certain stores on certain items. So and they're given very, very little cash, usually just enough for the 1 hour bus trip to get to the shops and back. They can't even buy their kids' birthday presents, Christmas presents. It's for essential items only. They've been completely controlled on how they can live and what they can spend their money on.
Wow. Gee, that's awful.
It is awful.
Yeah, I suppose to a certain extent they've done that in South Africa, not by taking away their choice, just by giving them next to nothing for work. You know, slavery.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, Lisa, looking at obviously what you've been talking about, and it's interesting that you've brought up this Lizard King thing, because I have this very, very good friend. His name's Dylan, also lives in Australia, and funny enough, he came over, we met on the David Icke discussion forum, and he came over to Zurich to see David Icke there when I was there, I interviewed David Icke the second time, and he, a couple of years, this was after he'd gone back to Australia, after he'd been out to see us. He one day sent me an email saying that he'd been listening to the radio, and that a broadcast came over the radio about some miners having dug something, and they were attacked by a massive, what they said looked like a dinosaur with wings, a brontosaurus with wings, is how it was described. And in the earth. And this is it. Ever since then, I've tried, and I listened to what you're saying about this Lizard King supposed to come out of the earth, that I've never been able to trace this. I even emailed David Icke about it at the time. He asked if I could find a link. I couldn't find anything. This guy had heard it come over a local radio station, that a bunch of miners had been chased out of a mine by this creature, and it was not covered in any of the mainstream news.
Wow, I haven't heard that one. That's extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know that there's every culture around the world has the same kind of prophecy right now. Is that this is the time of the return of something.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's a religious thing and it's the return of Christ, or whether it's, you know, a cultural prophecy. And these things that they're waiting on returning, for the most part, except for Christ, is some form of flying reptile.
Well, it's interesting.
Whether it's a dragon, or a snake with wings, or a lizard, or something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting indeed. And what the only one that seems to be very different is in fact the Christ story. But if you start now tracing the Jesus bloodline, and you follow the Ralph Ellis information, which says that Jesus was the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, the seventh, the last Ptolemy queen. Jesus was supposed to have been the descendant of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. And if you actually go and look at the Dragon Court information, and you trace, which I have, about who are the various bloodlines that go through the Dragon Court, you come to this Ptolemy dynasty with Cleopatra in it. And therefore her son Jesus would have theoretically had to come from this bloodline too. Okay.
Have you looked at any of John Lamb Lash's work?
No, tell us.
He has got a book called Not in His Image. And what he's done essentially is Lash has studied the Nag Hammadi text for the last 40 years. And what he has done is look at and study predominantly the stuff that the church has ignored, you know, the stuff that they've just thrown on the floor and said, no, we're not going to look at that. He's picked those pieces up and he's studied those as well as the rest. And he's come up with an amazing theory. But what he says is the Gnostics were around long before Christianity. The Gnostics were actually warning the people about Christianity as it was emerging. And he talks about the beginning of the Dark Ages starting with the death of Hypatia. Have you heard of Hypatia?
Mm-hmm.
She was like a priest in one of the Gnostic temples, priestess, very well educated, very intelligent, and she was literally torn to pieces by a rabid Christian mob.
Wow. Okay.
And they tore her body to pieces, and then actually went and stripped her bones of all its flesh, the whole bit. I mean, they were completely rabid, which really was the dawn of the Dark Ages when that happened. And the Gnostics have this whole story about what they call the pleroma, which I guess we would call the galactic core or the galactic center, where the creator gods live, these aeons, and that they're all in like twin flame relationships. And you had Sophia and Christos were two of the aeons who come together to create Earth and humanity. And that Sophia was so enamored, she was known as the outrageous one, and she became so enamored with her creation and was drawn to her creation so strongly that she was actually pulled out of the pleroma, and when she towards Earth, and what was already here in this galaxy was the Archons, which were a sort of parasitic race of beings. The Archons entrapped her, or she was somehow entrapped, inside the Earth itself. But in the process, she tainted these Archons by passing them by. She tainted them with consciousness. And that kind of leads through the story of these Archons are now really attempting to, take a look at the Greys with their breeding programs. That one of the reasons they're doing these breeding and hybrid programs, is because they're trying to reach ascension, or they're trying to reach individual consciousness and they needed a certain amount of our DNA to do it.
Yeah.
That kind of idea, right? So the Archons were tainted with consciousness, and she's been entrapped in the earth ever since.
You know what's interesting about Sophia? It's another name that is twinned with Lucifer.
Sapphire and Lucifer.
Yeah. Often she gets referred to as the morning star, as does Lucifer.
Isn't the morning star Venus?
Yes, that's correct. But Sophia, Mary, Lucifer all get referenced as the morning star. Venus. So yeah, it's all that same sort of characterism.
What we're waiting on is the return of Christos.
Yeah.
Her partner. And something really amazing happened the other week that's never happened before. He's been predicting this for the last few years, and he really wasn't sure it would happen. But he actually explained it exactly as it happened. What's going to happen, he said, was that she has to connect again. She has to send a message to the galactic core, to the pleroma. And she has to re-establish her connection and her communication with it. This is all part of her correction and her awakening. And there's a YouTube channel called Suspicious Observers. And they do this 2-minute, it's really concise, it's brilliant, this 2-minute review every day on what's going on around the world. With solar storms, earthquakes, maybe something politically significant. They do it in 2 minutes. It's wonderful. But one of the things back in, I think it was around the 12th of June, what's it called? There's something magnometer, the magnetic, there's some device that basically measures our electromagnetic field. And for the first time, it picked up this noise. And it's been doing it every day at 2 a.m. I think it's 2 a.m. GMT time. That there's this relay going on now between the Earth and the galactic. There's a relay happening at 2 a.m. every morning since the 12th. So John Landlash put out he was actually so excited.
This is the 12th of June?
Yes, just recently.
Wow.
So he's saying the connection's been made. She's now talking to the Galactic Centre again. She is, and that this ascension process is on.
So, and wow, this is amazing. Okay, so where is the noise coming from again?
The galactic core, what he calls the pleroma.
And what is picking it up? Where is it being picked up? What is actually...
It's being picked up. It's being on our magnetic field. There's a device, it's called something or other magnometer. And it's a device that reads our electromagnetic field all the time. And has done for years. And for the first time, there is this noise being picked up, which sounds like a two-way signal. There's one tone that is going out from the Earth, and another tone coming back in. And it's quite amazing. When I've listened to it, I'll send you the link to listen to John Lash's, what he calls his crew notes. He refers to himself as the navigator. He's been monitoring this correction. Now, the guy was absolutely drunk with joy and excitement and wonder when this happened, because he really didn't think it would. His hope for humanity wasn't great. But this happening has changed everything for him. I mean, the guy's been waiting for this for 30 years. But for him, it's on.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
And who knows, I mean, the thing is, we don't know what this is going to look like. That's what we all want to know, really. What does this look like for us? We don't know.
The big question, yeah.
And to certainly enough people out there with different versions of what it's going to look like. But getting back to that question I asked you before, what do you think is going to happen by December if it's same old, same old? You know, I was thinking about this yesterday because I was reading a channeling, and I'm very, very suspicious of channelings because I don't care how good it feels. You really don't know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And this person was absolutely adamant, and has been for years, that by the 21st of December 2012 will be in the fifth dimension.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, put yourself in that person's shoes. You've been channeling for 5, 10, maybe longer, years. Telling this story and being so adamant about certain events, and you've got hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of people around the world hanging on your every word, believing everything you're saying. If this doesn't happen the way you've said, where does that leave those people?
Yeah.
I'm concerned there's going to be, you know, mass suicides, like, all over the place.
Well, I just think there's so many people who have kind of gone, you know, we're sick and tired of the suffering, but we see an end in sight. We're going to ascend to the fifth dimension. Things are going to get better. And what if, like, that fifth dimension isn't something that happens instantly, or it doesn't necessarily change things? I think that is what we're looking at. You know, what happens after that whole period of, you know, the completion of the solar cycle? I don't know. You know, this is, to me, there's so much information that says we actually don't know what it's going to be like after that. Okay, everything as we know could change, and if it doesn't, what we need to do, people like yourself and I, we need to carry on doing what we're doing, pushing the solutions. You know, finding those people out there who have, you know, something to contribute to the overall picture. And in that way, you know, still continue to chip away, because it's, you know, there's so much work being done at the moment from all the different ends, as you've originally discussed. But most importantly is for us not to give up just because we think that there's some sort of mass prophetic universal shift that's going to change everything for us.
Yeah, if we don't go into those 3 days of darkness, or if we don't wake up on the 22nd of December and realise everything's changed, what happens? I mean, I've always thought it would be a great little thing. I mean, in a sense that, yes, everything seems to be happening pretty quickly right now and time is speeding up, so events would happen rather quickly overall, but it would not be one of those, we wake up one day and it's all changed. I didn't never thought that. And I could be wrong. Maybe it could happen like that.
Well, Lisa, you know, the one thing, having done this for some time now, is that I've realized that the more I learn, the less I actually know, and the less convinced I am of any point of view. All I ever realize is what I know for sure, what I don't believe. And that's it.
Well, now that I'm finally starting to hear about the Indigenous stories, that's where I'm putting my focus, I guess.
I'm so pleased to hear that. I was actually, you know, funny enough, brilliant. I was so pleased to, when you started talking about this earlier, because this is some part of the research that there's a huge gap. As a researcher myself, having researched like as much as I can about reptilian and sort of those sort of things across the world, you can't find very much more than a Wikipedia reference to things like rainbow snake. There's not really much to be found. And I'm so dying for someone just to interview a few of these Aboriginal tribal leaders and get their story, like Kevin Annett has done with his people in Canada. And if you can get that done, it'd be awesome, because that is what I feel there is a need for from a researcher point of view, from someone who asks, I think, semi-intelligent questions that I feel I'd like to know about.
Yeah, it's lovely that they're now starting to talk, and they don't seem to be coming forward and talking directly to people like me, mm-hmm. but they're talking to people who, like Stephen, who they've chosen to represent them, and that's fine too. But I'm actually going up north, and I'm going to be staying with Stephen as of tomorrow. As of this afternoon, I'm starting to head up there. And this is, I mean, they've been, because when the white when the English came here, you know, and it's the same. It was the same in America. You know, if the Indians there didn't share their wisdom with the settlers, they all would have died out again. Same here. You know, the Aboriginals shared what they knew, and were slaughtered for it. So they've learned to shut up and to keep quiet. But they also know now that now is the time. And the thing that concerns me is the more this year goes on without any major changes, the number of things that are supposed to happen between now and the 21st of December, that pace of change is going to be phenomenal. You know, the longer this year goes on without anything happening, and when I say without anything happening, I mean, you and I both know that things are happening every day, but it hasn't broken through yet. It hasn't affected everybody's life. It hasn't woken everybody up. It's not on mainstream media. So I guess that's what I'm talking about when I say major change. The financial system hasn't collapsed yet, at least not for most of the world. It has in some places.
Yep, indeed. But I think that's a good thing. You know I do have a concern for the sort of vacuum period in between the time of when we sort of have a more utopian society, and I don't mean to use the word utopian because everything would have a total utopian society, but definitely a better society than we have now and what we have in the present time. That vacuum concerns me as to what's going to happen, because I must say that I do have to agree with Franco Collins when he expressed that I don't think anarchy can be very dangerous. You know, a bunch of people lawless, you know, running around killing, taking what they want. I think it can be very dangerous. It's the transition in between, I think, is going to be the trickiest. It's how do we transcend?
That transition period.
Yeah. How do we get people and a largely ignorant world population to shift their thoughts and perspectives in what has taken you and I, you know, dozens of hours of interviews, hundreds of hours of interviews, much reading, you know, lots of research, concentrated interest to come to understand. You know, this is something.
Well, I think that's where you have to trust in the whole consciousness aspect, the consciousness shift.
Yeah.
That even if they wake up at the last minute, they wake up. And whenever I get too caught up in the very 3D aspects of what's going on here, that's what I go back to, is that ultimately this time is about consciousness. It's our consciousness that's going to be affected. Through everything that we've been told, through all of the legends and the prophecies from every culture, this is about consciousness. So regardless of whether or not the military in the US take out the cabal, regardless or not whether or not the Federal Reserve collapses, regardless of any of that, what's going to see us through it will be consciousness. Yeah. It has to come back to that. Because you'd go nuts otherwise, and you'd become one of those crazy preppers who lives in a bunker. Wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, because that's exactly sort of what happened to us, kind of thing, you know. when we first sort of came to start learning about this, is that if you don't understand the spiritual aspect of it, you end up crazy like that.
Yeah, and there's actually, I was talking to someone who knows, who's one of their very good friends, is a girl whose father got it in his head in the 70s that it was the end of the world, and took them out. This is here in Australia. Took them out into the middle of nowhere, and they lived like the Amish for, you know, most of their lives, and completely destroyed their lives. And it took him 20 years to kind of admit that, okay, maybe I was wrong, or maybe, you know, I was a bit drastic.
Smidgen, maybe.
It's funny, I'm sorry. Well, unfortunately, this is, I think, the whole point of what is behind the very much large proportion of fear-induced pretend alternative media that is out there. Santos Bonacci said it on my show, he believes 60% of it's all there to generate fear, the stuff you see on YouTube. I have to agree. You know, Lisa, I've been very vocal in my interview with you as to the fact that I feel there's large parts of the so-called truth movement that are co-opted. And I very much feel that this is the whole reason, is to get people into that place where they are totally helpless. They've got no home around them. They're in nothing but a moving vehicle, or potentially less around them, and they are the most vulnerable they can be.
Yeah, I've come to believe that the powers that were, one of the things that they absolutely understand and they know how to use and they, to a certain extent, control, is the collective consciousness. And they know how powerful it is. And they know that we are creating this moment by moment. And that's why they're still there. Because, now, David Icke, God love him, even though he is educating a lot of people, for 9 hours straight, he's got you in a lecture hall focused on lizards and the reptiles. Even though he's saying don't buy into the fear and be the love and, you know, it's all about consciousness, what you're really doing for those 9 hours is feeding the very thing he's telling you not to feed.
Yeah.
When you listen to Alex Jones, you're feeding the very thing he's telling you to be angry, you know, because he wants you to be angry. And that in itself is feeding the thing that we shouldn't be feeding. So here's the powers that be, knowing the power of the collective consciousness, knowing that their very existence depends on it, believing a certain thing, and they're constantly feeding us to feed the consciousness, to feed them. And I honestly think, from my own experience with, you know, working with the law of attraction, for an example, that when you cease to give something energy, it ceases to exist. I know that because when let's say I've been financially, you know, in a very big hole, and whenever I think about money, I can only feed it negative thoughts, and the hole just gets bigger. If because from in that state I can't be positive about money because the hole's too big, all I have to do is stop feeding it at all. Just stop giving it any energy. If I can't give it any positive energy or positive thought, then don't give it any. And just by ceasing to give it any, the situation resolves itself in my favour. And it's the same, here we are, I think it's the same situation with the collective consciousness and this whole cabal system. All we have to, how much are we talking about it now? Constantly, the alternative media airwaves are filled with, is today the day that we're going to the mass arrest start? Is today the day that, you know, that we're going to starve them financially? Is today that, you know, we are feeding them now more than ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we might think we're not because we're doing it in this anti-way, but we're still feeding them. We're still feeding them, and they are probably more than ever, and they are probably stronger than ever in some respects because of it. All we have to do is stop. Can we do that? Can we start a campaign where everyone switches off and doesn't talk about the cabal for like 2 days, 3 days, and see what happens?
I think that's a great idea. And you know, it's funny, after the 10th anniversary of 9/11, I put a ban on my Facebook page going, it's now, okay, we've had the 10th anniversary, I don't want any more 9/11 stuff, it's a distraction. Sorry, you know, I had a number of people who were unhappy and took me off. You know, Americans. But I've also said the same thing about, you know, people like Ron Paul, who's a Republican. I don't want anything to do with politicians on my page. I don't, as I've expressed to you as well, I've reason to believe that anyone who supports Ron Paul is playing part of the game. Anyone who supports any politician is playing part of the game. Politicians are not the solution. You know, we need to move beyond that.
Exactly.
Funny, you're talking about Alex Jones earlier. I must just share this with you, Lisa. I had a recurring dream for a few days, a couple of weeks back, that Alex Jones is really Eric Cartman from South Park. And I woke up actually so disturbed by the end of the third time I dreamt this, and I just thought to myself, oh, I have to switch the computer off for 3 days. I can't look at it for 3 days. A computer off, my mind is fried. And then I kind of realized to myself, hang on, I actually think that they are in fact the same entity if you look at who controls them.
Well, isn't the South Park, I think, who was it, that Goldbug dude? Dallas Goldbug? The guy who, do you know who he is?
No, I know Trey Parker, Matt Stone. I think that's what their names are. Yeah?
Yeah, that's what their names are. Well, this guy called Dallas Goldbug, he's got a YouTube channel, and he makes some absolutely ridiculous and outrageous claims, in my opinion. But he is identifying people that he claims are just actors playing multiple roles, and that those two guys who do South Park are supposedly the two young kids from Columbine that they were, I don't know, as part of the deal for going in there with guns and shooting out of school in Columbine, they got new identities, and now and some whatever the opportunities to do whatever they wanted to do, and they do South Park.
It's very interesting because you know what? Those two boys are were said to have been wearing South Park T-shirts when they were arrested.
Seriously?
Yeah, I distinctly remember this because someone was trying to, back then, and I thought it was absolutely ludicrous. Oh yeah, South Park is evil, it's linked to these Columbine boys, and when this whole Columbine shooting happened. But just on another note there, Lisa, the word Columbine actually comes from the word column, which means serpent. And column in French means dove, and if you actually go and you look at someone like Pierre Sabac's work, The Murder of Reality, which he spent 7 years looking through old dictionaries and traced whole bunches of words in the English language back to serpent origins, the word column, as in Columbus or Venus Columba, actually is a serpent. It comes from the word serpent. It's a serpent word. It's where you get the word cobra from. But
did you hear that Latin is actually the reptilian language?
Yeah, I have, but I've heard that. Well, but I've heard that it's the reptilian language backward, because satanic language is actually, they say if you hold a mirror up to Latin and you read it backwards, that's how spells are cast, is in the language of Latin but backward.
Oh, okay.
So that makes perfect sense. It ties in. And a lot of these demons that are supposed to communicate with people, and I've documented this for my own works because I'm looking into sort of the music industry and the pacts they make with the devil and whatnot, and I've found documented evidence of handwritten pacts with the devil where they've got demons who've apparently signed backwards, not from left to right, but from right to left, with symbols and letters that we can't decipher.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Unreal. It's a wonderful world, and I suppose as you know, I'm very passionate about this information, and I for one, I don't have any intention of giving up December 21st, 2012. No matter what happens, I think that going forward, whatever happens, there will definitely be a room for people to create, even if it's online libraries of information to educate the children of the future. And for me, that is absolutely how we go about creating a better world, is by creating better children.
Definitely. Have you read the book, The Continuum Concept?
No.
Oh, it's a great book. It came out in the 70s and was probably single-handedly started the whole conscious parenting movement. Why we carry our babies around in those pouches and slings now, and breastfeeding became popular again. It's a woman who went and spent either 2 or 5 years on and off observing a South American, I think it was South American, it might have been Brazilian actually, tribe. And she very much lived on the outskirts, didn't want to interact, because she didn't want to influence anything. She really wanted to be the observer. And she talked about how they bring up their children. Because any community, any culture of adults, the adults you end up with, very much depends on how they're brought up as children. And so her observations were focused a lot on what they were doing with their kids. And what she noticed is the way the adults hold a certain expectation. And this phenomenon, I call it a phenomenon that we have in the West, where kids run away from their parents in public. they run away from you in the shops or
Yeah.
down the street. She said it's absolutely unheard of in these cultures. The parents just hold this expectation that the kids will keep up. And that can be when they're walking through a jungle trek. The kid's survival depends on staying with the parent, just like with any other animal. And the children do. They haven't got to keep calling them to keep up or any of that stuff. It's up to the kid to keep up. The parents hold that expectation, and that's what happens. There was a huge pit, which I cannot remember if she mentioned its purpose, but there was a huge pit in the middle of this village. There was no fencing, there was no danger signs. And the toddlers were all playing around it, sitting on the edge of it even. They played with machetes. And no one ever gets hurt. No one hurts themselves. And it's the adults continue holding expectations for each other and for the children. She only saw one person ever get hurt. And it was a couple of kids who were having a sword fight with serious machetes. And one of them accidentally hurt the other one, mildly. I mean, can you imagine letting our kids do... I mean, we freak out. They grab a butter knife and we freak out. And raging rivers. But by the time they're 3, they're all swimming and without any problems. No one's ever drowned. It's all about our expectations. It's all about... And our collective again, a collective consciousness. And as a result, they grow up as safe, secure adults. There's no psychopathy in these communities. She tells the story of a father. She doesn't even know how it occurred to him or why, but there was some wood left over from something that he'd done, I think, and he decided to build what we would call a playpen. He spent all day on it, put his kid in it. The kid screamed immediately. He took it out and destroyed it. The idea of his child being unhappy was just intolerable. The children are continually nurtured. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those cultures also where they stay on the lap and they don't touch the earth for some time until they're ready to climb down, basically, put their feet on the ground. But yeah, I mean, we bring, well, not now, and certainly not me, but in the 60s, when I was a baby, it was, controlled crying and separation. And
the way we raise children today, and I know from my own mom, is that she always expected the worst. She lived in fear and expected the worst, and as a result, that's what she always got from me, in terms of behaviour and everything.
Exactly. It's about people live up or down to your expectations. How many times have you ever said, I knew he would do that or she would do that. I knew I knew they'd react that way. I knew they'd... Well, that's exactly what they did.
So they created that reality.
Yeah, that's the expectation we held, whether it was good or bad. And that's what we got.
And it's funny, those people never turn back. Sometimes they do, but they never actually turn back and go, and learn or realise, I created that reality. Rather, they play the blame game, and which is very sad, because in blaming others, you relinquish yourself of the gift of learning.
My husband and I are constantly bailing ourselves up. Like one of the kids will, fall over and hurt themselves, and we'll turn around and go, who created that? And he'll go, yeah, me. And we always own it, because it's crossed one of our minds. I wish she wouldn't do that. She'll probably hurt herself. And 2 minutes later, that's exactly what happens. So we just look at each other and go, okay, who expected that?
As a truly spiritually evolved family.
I don't know about that. We have our moments.
I'm sure. Lisa, I've said this to you before. I have the utmost respect for you doing what you're doing, having kids, because I don't, like there aren't many women doing what we're doing. There's a reason for it, because I think, first of all, psychologically, you have to be quite strong to take on this information, especially when you look at the dark heart of the beast, as I've done. I've gone right in there. But also, from the aspect of, as a woman, you naturally a nurturer and potentially want to have kids or have kids. And, right now I'm kind of on that threshold, as you well know, because I tell you what will change for me, Lisa, is if we come through I'll commit this to you now. If we come through 21st December 2012 to the other side and things start to get better, I tell you what, I've said to my husband, I'd love to have a kid next year, but not until I know what's on the other side. So I'm holding out for that.
No, I understand that for sure.
And theoretically, if we end up in the fifth dimension, I want my child to be conceived and born in the fifth dimension. Why you don't want your child born in this dimension? This world is an awful place.
Well, if there are kids in your future, it's because this is an agreement you made some time ago. Yeah. I know that.
Well, again, I'm kind of wondering, I have absolutely no sort of pressing urge to have kids. Perhaps that's because it's not part of my agreement to have children in this lifetime. Perhaps part of my agreement is to dedicate my life to serving others and teaching and sharing information. And you know what? Having children really does limit, first off, your travel. Secondly, the resources. And thirdly, what you can realistically involve yourself in terms of danger levels.
Well, that's true, because there are people I've definitely turned down interviewing because if it was just me, I would have done it, but I've got other people to think about, and they would have, bringing certain information out is dangerous.
Yeah.
And I'm not prepared to put my family through that. So yes, there are people I haven't interviewed for those reasons. There are people that are too hot, so to speak. But right now, that's probably the only thing that being a mother is affecting in terms of my work. Yeah. I'm still able to do what I'm doing. Okay. And you can do both. You can do both. But you'll know. Like, when after I had my second child, I knew that there was one more. There was just one more. I had one more in me. There was one more to come. You just know if they're there or not. They make their presence felt.
Okay, talking about your work, Lisa, how do you go about selecting the people that you interview?
There has to be a couple of reasons. Either because there's a connection, I'm connecting with something that they're saying. Maybe not all of it, but something. But a couple have been by popular demand. Please interview this person. There's only been a few of those though. But so for the most part, it's because I think the person, there's an element of truth in what they're saying. And it's an interesting story. It's always got to be an interesting story.
When I first got into this and I started researching, I remember watching something on a YouTube clip, and I can't even remember who it was, but it was one of these famous authors that had written something about the Knights Templar. And he said something to me which really appealed to me. He said to me, there just aren't enough people digging through the information, and there should be more of us. We need more people putting this stuff out there. And as I thought to myself, there isn't, yes, you've got, at that stage, you had Project Camelot. That was really the only place you could go to get interviews from whistleblowers, and everything sort of has bloomed since then. I mean, we sort of got inspired out of that, and then since then there's been this absolute explosion of alternative media, which has been a wonderful thing, because what it's shown to me is that first off, there's a lot of it's not just yes, we have a lot of apathy, but we also have a tremendous amount of focus, intelligence and enthusiasm. And if we do get to the other side of December 21st, 2012, and we have a chance to walk towards a greater future, let me tell you, there are some wonderful people out there who have some truly, genuinely good ideas. And it's not all lost. It's not all lost. If we don't ascend, we still have a planet to rebuild.
Absolutely. And we have the technology. That's the beautiful thing too. I mean, that's what I was saying about the information that's coming to me about Australia, is that these models, these concepts, and very practical models and tools on how we could be living are all here. We've got it all. We've already got the information. It's there. The technology is there. We could clean up Fukushima tomorrow. That's the sad thing. just need to be allowed to give them the opportunity to do it. We could clean up the waters of the world in a matter of months. It's all doable. It's all there. That's the frustrating thing, I guess, is that there's still that force to be reckoned with that's preventing us from moving forward. At least that's how we see it.
Well, I've been hugely inspired by, as we spoke about earlier, people like Kevin Annett, who are taking on the Vatican very bravely and, you know, at a huge cost to him personally. Like, imagine having gone through you live in a university digs. You have to eat off other people's plates, what they don't eat, in order to survive. You get to the end of your university life and get denied your degree because of, you know, the stuff that you're involved in exposing. You know, and how they interfered and destroyed his marriage and everything. I just think, you know, one thing I'm very grateful for.
He was a reverend, wasn't he?
He's a minister. Yeah, he's still a minister of a church. He's still ordained as a minister.
He's still okay.
Yeah.
How come he hasn't been excommunicated by now?
Well, you can get it all from him. I've put this up on my radio show. I actually did ask him this question, and he is still a minister. He, you know, it's also like Eric John Phelps, who I highly recommend you chat to as well. Although I don't share his very, very Calvinistic Protestant religious outlook on things, which can at times verge on racism, he is probably the number one authority when it comes to Vatican assassins and Jesuit conspiracies. And I mean, his book, Vatican Assassins, the third edition, which is 25 years, I mean, it's tripled the original edition of it. Has to be read by anyone who's doing this. However, you know, I've said to him, why haven't you been excommunicated? And there are genuinely parts of the Calvinist. You look at the religious revolution which went on here in Holland. It started here in Holland in the 1600s in various places, and it was the Calvinistic Protestants who were rebelling against the Vatican. It was the Reformation. And then after that, you got the Jesuits coming in who brought about the Counter-Reformation. This whole trying to escape the dark sort of empire, whether you want to call it the Vatican, whether you want to call it the Roman cult, whether it's the black nobility, the people behind the Roman cult, you know, whatever you want to call it, people have been fighting it since its inception in one way or another, and it's been fighting back. And it's been a bloody battle all the way along. What we just need to do is connect the fact that all these little campaigns are not individual wars, not World War I, not World War II. The Crusades have been raging for over 1,000 years. They're still going. They have never ended. But I think, you know, when we get to this point where we're at now, where there's a cognitive realization of what is going on, and people are starting to understand what's happening, and you've got people putting together efforts such as Kevin Annett with his International Tribunal into crimes against the church and state, and he's coming over to Europe in September, and he's actually going to go down to Brussels, you know, to sort of the European Union headquarters, and with his charter to actually, you know, charge the church. I mean, he has said, he's actually said to me, we have a common law right to take responsibility if the state and the government fail to protect the people. It is part of our natural common law right. It's in the Magna Carta. You know, this law actually does exist where we can arrest people in power.
Yep. And, you know, what went on in Canada has gone on here too. Mm. And the institutions here that were run by the church. There was one of my co-hosts on Oculus Radio. He was one of 4 children, and his parents left the house one day and never came back. Went off in different directions and never came back. The neighbours found them 3 days later, and he was 1. There was a younger one than him who was only like 3 months old, and I think 2 and 3, or 3 and 4. 4 children. So they were put into care. Their father was a pedophile, so he refused to actually authorise them to be put out to be adopted, so that he could come once a month and take one of the kids out for a weekend visit. Mm-hmm. All right, get access to his children that way. But apparently a notorious pedophile, And so David grew up in this. He grew up in these institutions. And there was 350 kids disappeared in 10 years. Just disappeared. There was a whole so-called royal commission on it that went for 5 years or something, which resulted in $5,000 payment shut-up money to all those involved. And it was tied to a pedophile group that they went by the name of the family, I think, and consisted of, all of the, aristocracy of South Australia. And no charges were laid. The whole thing went nowhere. After 5 years of investigation, the judge who was sitting on the case, it destroyed him because of the evidence that he heard. And none of the recommendations that he made were followed up. None of them. He retired shortly after it. He just couldn't go on. And I know that all the details of that is going to be explained to Kevin, possibly on the show. He's very keen in following it up, because the corruption there is just absolutely astounding.
Yeah. Well, I'm keen, obviously, and Lisa, I'm very keen to keep an eye on what's going on with that in Australia. More than anything, want to bring together all the parallels and show that the pattern is the same everywhere. Where there has been colonization by colonial powers and destruction of native tribes.
Yes. Yeah. Everywhere they went. And getting back to the history of Australia, there's actually a treaty. The Aboriginals have been holding on to this forever. There's a treaty on a kangaroo skin with the Spanish from the 1500s. And the Spanish have also got a copy of it. There were some elders that went over to Spain and spoke to the King of Spain, and he acknowledged that they've got their copy. The originals here have got treaties with so many cultures long before the English arrived. And I guess my question around that is, firstly, why have they just held on to it and kept quiet for these? I mean, they should have been waving this thing around 200 years ago. And why didn't the Spanish turn around and go, hey, excuse me, English, we've got a treaty with these people? But I guess at the time, the English ruled the waves, and they were the economic power, and Spain had already caved into the English at that point. So they probably weren't in a position to argue too much with them. But it changes the whole history of this country.
Yeah.
The political history.
No, I find very fascinating about Australia is, as you mentioned earlier, is your hieroglyphs and those pyramids you got going at Gympie. I mean, are there any other sort of strange things that we should be knowing about that aren't being put out in the mainstream media?
Funny you should ask. Last week, what's today? Today for me is very early Monday morning.
Oh, bless.
Last Tuesday, I went to the Blue Mountains, which is in sort of Western Sydney. Amazing place. Absolutely amazing. And I was taken out with Stephen Strong to a site to assess its cultural significance. And all I can tell you is the place felt alien. And I've been sick ever since, mind you.
No way. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, we saw this place, this part of the mountains is made up of sandstone. There's 4 types of sandstone, and I think it's one that is the softest. It's 1 to 4 is how they measure it. I think it's 1 that's the softest, 4 is the hardest. It could be the other way around. And a lot of this is actually just 1. It's so soft it breaks up in your hand like a dried up cake. It's just amazing. And what we found there were, I can't disclose the location other than to say the mountains. But what we found there was channels, like piping, constructed of this incredibly soft sandstone inside that still broke apart in your hand, but had an outer crust that looked and felt like solid rock. So that some technique had been used to harden the outer surface and create shapes. And this stuff looks thousands of years old. And it's not part of the landscape. They're sitting on top of the natural rock. We found what to everybody who was there could see was a 2.5 metre footprint that was about 2 feet deep, a 2 foot deep impression in what appeared to be solid rock. But there was on the outer shell, again, it broke away, a piece of the outer shell had broken away, and inside it was nothing but sand. I mean, soft sand that fell through your fingers, not even sandstone. There was just so many little artifacts and anomalies, and there's even a pyramid in the distance, and there's no trees, don't grow there, no tall trees. You can see this whole area, this valley that we were in, and the mountain peaks, no tall trees, just small shrubs, just, nothing but sort of 1 foot high foliage at best. Nothing deep enough. It's not deep, whatever it is, it's not deep enough for any trees to root, but all around it, all the mountains around it, covered in trees. Something has happened in this place. And in certain spots, when you stood at mountain on peaks and looked down into these valleys, it looked terraced. It looked like you were standing at the top of a modern-day mine. It was, and no animal life. Admittedly, it was winter and they're probably hibernating, but it was an eerie lack of animal life. I'm sure it'd be a different story in summer with the snakes out, but this was, the energy of the place was extraordinary. And that night, admittedly, we walked around it for about 5 hours, so I expected some sore legs at the end of it. But that night, we were all shattered, absolutely shattered, energetically, physically, emotionally, just shattered. And a couple of us have been sick ever since. And we all came to the same conclusion that this is not an Aboriginal site, this is an alien site. These guys were here years ago, a long, long time ago, and they were mining the area.
Yeah.
And somebody was tall enough to have 2.5 metre long feet.
It's funny, we got the same thing, a similar foot impression in South Africa, quite close to an area which has mines that are dated to be over 100,000 years old.
Yeah, well, I can tell you without any shadow of a doubt that was the feeling of myself and most of the other people there, that it was very alien. And for one of the women there who is very sensitive to energy, she said she'd never felt anything like this place since being in a temple in Egypt.
Wow. Very interesting.
And it was extraordinarily beautiful. I mean, amazing to stand on top of mountains where there's actually cloud below you gathered in the valleys, and you've got this whole sense of being on top of the world. I mean, it was just gorgeous. Very cold and crisp air. Just beautiful. But the feel of it was odd.
Mm. So it's actually, you say like piping that were hard on the outside and the inside was the soft stone?
Yeah, absolutely. So some technique had been used to harden the outside. Mm. So when not a whole cylindrical pipe, but a channel.
Mm.
And they were exactly 68 mil wide, the walls of it. Exactly, both sides. Further down, as the channel seemed to, but this is all, a lot of it was broken as well, so been broken off pieces over the years, and it all headed towards the edge of the cliff. And down on the cliff drop, down the bottom we found smaller pieces that were exactly 34 mil wide in the walls. I mean, nature doesn't do that, I'm sorry. She's not that precise.
Yeah.
And there's no way what we've been told about the way the Aboriginals lived, that they made these things. And there was there was actually the lack of Aboriginal markings in itself was a sign. And it's like the Aboriginals just didn't go to that spot, because any spot that they would frequent, they marked. They would put a scribble on the ground, a drawing, a glyph, something. There wasn't any. None. There was no signs that the Aboriginals had spent any time there in this spot.
Well, you know what, Lisa? You need to find one of these Aboriginal tribal leaders and have a little chat to them, I think. I'm dying to hear what they have to say. I've been trying to find one who, you know, it's so difficult to track one down from the other side of the world, especially since they don't necessarily frequent Facebook. But I can imagine that there must be so many things that they've held onto that needs to come out now. So, you know, my honest request...
It's probably all going to come out via Stephen, and that's who I'll be talking to.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, let us know when that interview is up. I'm very excited to hear, because there has been a definite silence from the Australian natives, considering how much it's been coming out from sort of other parts, you know, like Dr. Credo Mutwa in South Africa, as well as, you know, Kevin Annett, you know, speaking on behalf of all those people, native people in Canada. And then, of course, you've also got, you know, there's various groups as well in South America who are now also coming, you know, and speaking out about things, particularly because they obviously believe that the Mayan prophecy will be fulfilled.
Yeah, funnily enough, some of the Mayan elders came out here to speak to our elders, and one of the things they said to them was that they're going to they're heading back for the hills. They're getting away from the cities and heading into the hills because they think everybody's going to go mad. And they don't want to be around it. That everyone's going to just lose their minds a bit. And they're protecting themselves and bringing back their communities up in the mountains. And I think that's what's happening here with the Indigenous as well. They're starting to slowly move back to community.
Yeah.
And remove themselves from the cities.
Well, there's a lot, I tell you, I'm getting at the moment, and it's funny you mentioned, just this month, there's been a few people who've come forward to me and who said, you know, I've got this weird feeling, and, you know, when I say this month, not July, I mean June, actually. Something's going on, and more in June than ever before have come forward. Marla, is this, you know, you touched a lot of people, is this something going on, people posting on my wall? What is this?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, just...
It's like a tension. People are just feeling this tension building.
Yeah. It's there. It's feverish. It's simmering.
Feverish, that's a good word, yeah. That explains it.
Yeah.
Feverish.
Right.
And what about you? Are you feeling it on a personal level too?
Lisa, do you know, I am. I have been feeling this for a while now. It really has picked up pace. But it's more so... as well, and I'll tell you what's interesting is that my husband and I have started to notice, if you will, a blending of realities, and that we are quite perceptive and can perceive if there are entities around us. You know, when we sleep, we're always in the astral realm, you know, doing what we do there. And, you know, we wake up sometimes exhausted, as if we've had absolutely no rest at all. But what I've noticed is that what we can perceive with our five sense reality and what is beyond our perception are actually merging. We're starting to see more and more of these intelligent energies around us, not just actually feel them, but actually see them in terms of seeing the energy fields. I'm starting to notice things that I haven't been able to see before, like the sky changed color the other day right in front of our faces, and I just don't understand how that happened. It went from one color to a completely different color, as if someone turned on a television kind of thing.
What did it go from to?
It went from a very light blue to a very different shade of purpley blue, like no cloud movement, no sun setting suddenly, it just in front of our faces. My husband and I both saw, we both looked at each other, and we've noticed this a few times. Suddenly the sky would just change a color. And I don't think it's necessarily the fact that it's doing anything different to what it's done before. I think it's our perception of the electromagnetic spectrum is increasing. What we are able to perceive is increasing because of the evolution that our DNA will be going through in response to the the energetic frequencies that are going to be happening through the course of whatever's coming next. I mean, you know.
There's also the idea that this whole universe, I'll say this galaxy, our solar system, actually, I'll put it down to our solar system, is an illusion. It's in a 3D matrix. And the only organic planets in it is Earth and Venus. The two that spin the opposite way are the only organic beings. And the rest of them are just part of the matrix program. And that we're actually going to start seeing them disappear.
That would be cool.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That could be very viable, because we also discussed, what you've just said there, and it's funny you said it straight after I mentioned the sky changing colour. Richard and I actually said maybe it's the matrix flickering. Maybe it's one of the glitches they talk about in this illusion. Yes, it was kind of that feeling, really. To be honest with you, when that sky, my husband's nodding furiously, as in, yeah, that's what he felt like when we saw the sky suddenly just change colour.
Yeah, that's cool.
I don't, who knows? Maybe everything around us we perceive is an illusion. We may not even look how we perceive ourselves in the mirror.
No. And I know some empaths. Well, I call them empaths, but who have started to have dreams about the planets disappearing. And that's the sort of thing that NASA and anybody else is not going to be able to put a spin on if that starts to happen.
Interesting
to see how they try and explain that one away.
Interesting.
Good luck.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, listen, we're coming to the end of this fantastic conversation, and I think we're heading up to 5 o'clock in the morning where you are.
Yes, 10 to 5.
Okay. Well, we're gonna end it there. I'm gonna say thank you very much for a wonderful conversation, and it's a privilege to have you contributing to our information archives and Freedom Central. And we'll catch up again in private soon. And from everyone who's tuned in to listen to you, thanks for joining us, Lisa.
No, you're welcome. Have a great day or evening for you.
And day for you, and we'll speak soon.
Okay, Dom.
Take care. Cheers then. Bye.